All right, it's 1 o'clock. Should get started. Hope everyone's doing well. Thanks for joining us on this webinar today. We're going to be talking about the value of values. I'll do a quick introduction of myself in a minute, but want to also let you know that Chris Stadler from our team is also in the room, and he'll be helping out. If you've got questions in the Q&A, feel free to throw them on there. He'll get them answered, or he'll shoot them over to me and we'll get them answered. If you guys have thoughts, comments, whatever, just throw them at us. And if you want to tweet or share this on Facebook or Instagram or anywhere else, please do. If there's something that you're really enjoying or you're getting a lot of value, please feel free to share it. But we'll get started here, and hopefully you learned something about values. So cool. So today is the value of values. Craft the compelling beliefs that drive employee engagement, customer loyalty, and growth. And we'll get more into what all that means. But first, some quick introductions. I'm Mike Jones. I'm the managing partner and CEO of Resound, and I'll get into that, who we are. You can check us out at resoundcreative.com. And of course, hit me up on Twitter, RemarkaMike, and Resound is our corporate handle if you want to get in touch with us at all. So who is Resound? We're an organization that we believe that because people are intrinsically remarkable and organizations are created by human beings, that every organization is also remarkable. That might actually be a little counterintuitive to what some people think, but the reason that that's counterintuitive, I think, is because a lot of organizations don't act like they're remarkable. So they are, but they don't act like it. And therefore, when we see them and we interact with them, we don't think they're remarkable either. That comes out in a lot of different ways. We'll talk about some of those today. And what we do is we help companies through workshops and a lot of strategy and thinking, as well as execution in their creative. We help them find their authentic identity in order to resonate with their audiences and hopefully build longer lasting customer relationships. And we do that through a few different services. We offer brand strategy, identity development, content strategy, website and collateral development, and video production. So those are just a few of the ways that we help companies do that. But really, it's all about finding that identity and telling that story to the world. A few of the clients that we've worked with, so you know we're not just blowing smoke. Some of these you might know, some of them you might not. And we've worked with hundreds of others, both from small business up to medium size and even some pretty large companies. But just to kind of set the stage today, we're going to be talking about brand values, but I first want to kind of talk about what is a brand and what is not a brand, just so we're all on the same page and we're really talking around the same terms and we understand where each of us is coming from. So kind of the question becomes, what is a brand? Some people might say it's the name, right? It's what you call your organization or your company. These are some great examples of good names. I mean, some of these are so good, like Popsicle, we don't even realize that it's actually a registered, trademarked brand name. Isn't that crazy? I throw that name around all the time and just say like, oh yeah, go grab a popsicle from the fridge. And I don't even think about the fact that I'm actually using not a generic term, but an actual brand name.
Do they even have another name?
Not that an ice pop, maybe? I don't know. That's a great question. Frisbee, Jacuzzi, Kleenex are kind of all in that category. So I threw them on here because they're kind of fun. So maybe it's more than that. Maybe you got to have more than a name to have a brand. Maybe you need to have a name and maybe it's the logo, right? Here's some really classic ones. I think we could recognize every single one of these brands just from their logo, right? Is there any one of these you wouldn't recognize or that you'd be like, no, I need them to spell it out for me? No, it's pretty clear. We've got some pretty recognizable companies here. And yet it feels like there's more to it, right? Like brand isn't just the name and the logo. Maybe it's a little bit more. So maybe you throw a tagline in there too, right? There's some famous taglines. Some of these you might even know the company right from the tagline. You don't even have to see a name, don't even have to see a logo, and you already know who it is. And yet when we think about it, we go, name, logo, tagline, is that it? Is that all I need to have a brand? And it doesn't feel quite right? It still feels like it's still missing. Like that's not it. That's not the brand. It's parts of the brand maybe, but it's not the totality of it. So maybe it's when you add some advertising, right? And of course, this video won't play, but you guys remember the great commercial from the Super Bowl a few years ago. And you can think of great commercials throughout all of history of advertising where you remember the brand, right? You were entertained or educated and you really got a good emotional feel, and they did a good job of putting their name in there. And yet, when you say, okay, maybe that's the defining factor of a brand, you go, no, there's something more, right? You can't just have a name, a logo, a tagline, and maybe a good, cool ad. You got to have something more, right? So maybe it's like, okay, it's all that stuff, plus it's a product, right? The way you come about executing your product or delivering your service, right? And we can think of great examples of that. You know, think of your iWatch and like how amazingly well crafted it is and thought through. And yeah, maybe it's got a few issues here and there, but overall, it's a really well-designed experience, right? Or maybe it's something like Facebook. For all of its faults, right? We still acknowledge that it's usable and it has features that allow me to get from point A to point B and do what I need to do in it. There's a reason why there's, you know, what, half the world is on the application, right? And we all log into it at least once a week, right? If not every single day, maybe even more, right? There's something there. And I mean, I can't talk about, you know, design of a service or a product without talking about Starbucks. I mean, you can walk into almost any Starbucks, got a totally different layout, got a different, you know, real estate and the kind of configuration it has to be in based on the real estate around it. And yet when you walk in, you get the same feeling every time. That is design, right? That is very consistent, well thought out, strategic design that their organization has really put into creating a unique experience that is still consistent no matter where you are in the world, no matter what Starbucks you roll into. Is that the brand? Is that it? Is it literally just the customer experience? Or is there something more? Or maybe it's when you can get your logo tattooed on someone's arm, right? Okay, that's a joke. That's a joke. That's a logo I designed a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And yes, that's when you've arrived, when your client decides to put your logo you designed on their arm. That was a once in a lifetime experience. It was pretty cool. No, my buddy's, he's a hip hop artist, and that was the logo I designed for him and his collective. Cool logo. And he put it on his arm. Like, holy crap, dude. So maybe brand is all that stuff, right? That's brand. Well, sorta, right? Like, it is all that stuff, and yet it still feels like your brand is something more, right? It's maybe something deeper, because I would say your brand is actually your identity, right? It's who you are. And that's a pretty deep concept. If we want to look at kind of the history of the word and how it's been used to help us understand how we've gotten here, we have to understand that brand actually comes from, it's the Old Norse term, Old Norse, or, you know, some Viking in there, there's a little bit of Germanic. It comes from the word brander, which originally just meant literally to burn, like take some twigs and light them on fire, right? Literally fire, to burn something. And then quickly that developed into using that term to describe how you might mark something like your sheep or your cattle, some of your livestock as yours, right? With a brand, right? You take a piece of metal, you shove it in the fire, get it really hot, and you would put a mark on your sheep, just to make sure that, like, hey, you know, George next door, he's got different sheep, right? And they've got a different brand marking on them. These are mine and those are his. And we don't want to get them mixed up, because that just leads to all sorts of mayhem. We want to keep our neighbor's stuff separate from ours, right? And then over time, the next really big use of it was during kind of the mercantile period of shipping, especially with England and Spain and Portugal, a lot of the Netherlands as well, who were trading goods all over the world. And in particular, they were shipping a lot of tea and spices. And as those ships would unload their product at a new port, maybe let's say in Boston, tea, Boston, they'd unload, right? And we're talking like 1600, 1500, 1600s. They'd unload their product in a new port. And those working at the port would have to like get this big crate off the ship, and they'd be like, okay, great, there's this big crate, now what? What do we do with it? We have no idea. We know that there's stuff inside this crate that needs to go to certain stores, right? Certain shops in town, but we have to open up this crate in order to know what's inside. And so what happened was these companies that had developed, like the East India Tea Company, were realizing that they needed to put a mark on the outside of the crate for a purely functional benefit of helping these people working in the ports to understand, where does this crate need to go, right? Which shop does it need to go to? So of course, you know, like their ancestors who were marking their livestock, they said, wow, let's just take a brand and burn it right on there. We'll just burn our company name or our product name right on the side of the box. And pretty soon those boxes start getting put into the stores, and you know, a shopkeeper might say, oh, you know, I kind of need an extra table around to put some more product on, so let me just pull out this crate. Or customers would see that crate being unloaded and seeing the goods coming out of it, loose tea, right? That probably would have gotten repackaged in its own jar that the shopkeeper kept, right? So that was their only symbol, was seeing that crate with that mark on it, that branded mark, to know, hey, that's that kind of tea from that company. And you know what? When I've had it before, I really enjoyed it. And so now people started asking for products. They asked for tea or spices or certain things that originated from a specific company, saying, hey, do you remember that company that had that mark on the side of their crate? Yeah, it kind of looks like this, you know, or it says this because it's their name. Well, we want some more of that. We want more tea from that company. I'd like to buy some more. So it becomes, that's really when you see the introduction of brand in the sense of a logo, sense of a mark, something that customers are asking for, but it's still really just a signifier of ownership, right? It's a signifier of this versus that. And now we live in a world where brand actually means something a whole lot more, right? We have customers now who buy our brands, not just because they saw the logo and recognize it, but because our brands tell them something about themselves, right? There's a reason why, it's really interesting. There's a reason why Apple uses white headphones. And they were one of the first companies to do so, because they realized something. They realized that there's a social impact or a social construct to the way that we purchase things. We don't just purchase things to fulfill a certain physiological need, right? Or a specific problem needs to get solved, but also because we want others to identify us with other people, right? So when we create a really strong brand, something beyond just a mark, but really like an actual identity, we're actually allowing customers to join into that tribe and say, we identify with this brand and all the other people who associate with it, including other customers. So when I wear my white, you know, AirPod or AirBud, I don't remember what they're called, right? The little like Apple iPhone or Apple earbuds that are white, I'm now identified, and I see myself as identified with other people who also use the same product. Because they're white, they stand out. This was actually a social phenomenon when they first released white earbuds. They actually people studied people's usage of them and realized that, yes, they were more likely to purchase them if they saw their friends also wearing them. And even strangers, like if you're on a bus or public transport and you see someone wearing white earbuds, and white just stands out a lot more than black, right? It's also not a super, especially at the time when they came out with them, it's not a super common product. And so there's this like identity aspect, both for the brand and for the customer, right? And I think that's really important to identify. So when we talk about brand, we're really talking about who you, your company or your organization, who you really are, not what you want to be or what you think your customers want you to be. Those are important questions, and I think they should be answered in the process. But really, who are you, right? And that means we have to ask some tough questions, and we have to get really deep and unpack a lot of complexity. There's a lot of depth. There's a lot of pieces, right, to our brands. And if our brand is really a part of our identity, if it's really a reflection of our identity, it's going to have to get really deep. We're going to have to get to the core of it. And ultimately, we're going to have to look ourselves in the mirror, right? You can see all these little metaphors we've created here. You have to look at ourselves in the mirror, and sometimes what we see in the mirror is not what we actually are, right? So we want to make sure that when we look in the mirror, we're actually seeing what's there, not what we want to be, but who we really are, right? And that's because brand is complex. It's a lot like DNA. In fact, I'm pretty close to DNA. DNA is really interesting. A lot of who we are is actually defined by our DNA. Not everything, right? We're certainly creatures of both environment and nature. And yet nature is a pretty defining factor, and science has proven that time and time again to a lot of who we are. And you can't really mess with DNA a whole lot before it just either falls apart or you get some really crazy mutations, right? And most of the time, if you mess with DNA and it mutates, it's usually to the negative, right? One of the most common examples of DNA mutation is cancer, right? And that's the most common example of when our DNA fails us, right? And it mutates in the wrong kind of way. And that's the most common way that it mutates. And kind of like DNA or what it produces, our brand grows, right? The expression of our brand grows over time. We start in kind of one spot. We start as a seed and we grow and we get maybe a trunk and some leaves. And then eventually we're a full tree and really with the ultimate outcome of producing fruit. It's going to be up to you to decide what your brand's fruit should be, right? Is that just more and better customers? Is that providing more value to the world? Is that some greater mission or purpose that you have to see change in the world happen? Or maybe it's simply just to grow something larger than yourself, right? Those are really the questions that need to be answered in the process of working on your brand. And it's a lot like your soul, right? We relate a lot of what brand is for companies back to what people are. Because really what a brand is like an identity. It's a corporate identity. So it's a group of people coming together for a common purpose, striving towards a similar goal based on a similar set of values. And that's really similar to how a person identifies with their own identity and soul, right? I am a person with a purpose, with a core set of values, who has a vision for the world, right? And we can combine together into organizations and do the same thing. And so a lot of what the work we do with brands is very similar. As you're working on your brand, if you really relate it back to how you would work on your own personal identity, you're going to find a lot of overlap. And that's a really kind of easy way to unpack it. And what's really critical is understanding that your brand is not your product, not intrinsically. And this is a hard concept. As you're working on your brand, it's very easy to fall back into patterns of thinking of your brand as your product. It's not the specific product or services that you provide. Those are functional. They're expressions of your brand. They're outputs of your brand, but they are not the brand in and of themselves. And that's kind of case in point here, is that it's easy to interpret a product, right? We can think about a product, we can think about its features, its benefits, we can think about who is it specifically built for or designed for, or who do we offer it to. And it's a fairly easy equation to start filling in the blanks on. It's not, the simplest thing in the world, but it's fairly easy. Versus when we think of our souls, right? The foundation of our identity, that's a lot harder, right? And that's why brand really has to start from the bottom up. You can't really start from the outside in. If you start from the outside in, we'll give you a little word picture to explain it, but if you start from the outside in, you'll start with product, and you'll never actually get to the really deep inner core of your brand. Why do you exist? What's your purpose? Where are you trying to go? What's your vision for the world? And what are the core values that really rally all of your team and your partners and vendors and customers? What holds it all together, right? That's why you have to start from the bottom up. So case in point, right? It's a lot like a foundation of a house. When you build a house, would you ever build a house without putting a foundation down first? I wouldn't, right? I mean, I guess maybe if you happen to be building your house on a like massively solid rock that's already basically a foundation, right? But you'd want to know that ahead of time, right? You'd have to do the due diligence to decide that, yes, that spot of ground is actually a really, really solid piece of rock. And 9 times out of 10, that's not how you're going to build your house. You're not going to find yourself building on top of a big rock. You're going to have to put a rock down yourself, right? You're going to have to lay down a foundation. And yet when we go and purchase a house, right, we go shopping for a house, what's the last thing we look at? It's the foundation, right? Because it's not the foundation that necessarily sells the house, but it is one of the most critical pieces to it, right? Because if the house doesn't have a foundation, and if that foundation isn't really secure, how good is the rest of it, right? So if we're going and shopping for a house, we might think, oh, wow, we might look at things like, wow, this house has some super awesome solar panel and, you know, infused roof. And, oh, wow, look at those amazing, like triple, quadruple, quintuple paned windows. And it's got some really green grass out front. And oh my goodness, have you seen those reclaimed Viking ship garage doors? Right? That's the stuff we get really excited about, right? And that's kind of like your product. Your customers get excited about your products, but it's the brand that sets the foundation for all of it and makes it work. And if the foundation is crumbling, or it wasn't set right, or it's got a big crack in it, or maybe it's even got a gap, right? It's 2 different foundations and you stuck one house on top of it, eventually that stuff's going to start falling apart, right? And at that point, customer walking through your little brand house is not going to care about your reclaimed Viking wood ship doors. They're going to be like, look at this thing, it's falling apart. Foundation is totally not solid. I'm not buying this, right? So why does that matter? Okay, little puzzle here. You're in the market for a minivan. Just bear with me here. You are shopping for a minivan. There's no other choice because you need a minivan. That's how this scenario works.
Suspend all disbelief.
Yeah. Don't argue with me that you really don't want a minivan. In this scenario, for it to work, you need a minivan, okay? So you need a minivan. You're shopping and you've come down to these 2 final options. Which one do you pick? Based on what you see here. On the left is Chrysler, on the right is a Volkswagen. Okay, think about that. All right, a lot of times when I give this demonstration, when I do this in workshops or presentations, most of the time people pick the Volkswagen. And the reasons they throw out are usually something around German engineering, right? Like it's just so solid and it's safe and it's built really well and it's gonna run, right? It's got this history, it's steeped in history. There's a lot of brand reputation. What's really interesting is what is the actual functional difference between these 2 vans? If you do your automotive history homework, you're going to find out that outside of the exterior, right, when you get beyond the exterior and you go down into the guts of this car and you pop the hood, right, you look at the engine, you look at the drivetrain, you look at the chassis, you're going to find out that actually, forget the aesthetic stuff. Beyond the, inside the aesthetic stuff, everything is exactly the same. Do you know who made these 2 cars? Chrysler did. Chrysler had built the original model, and Volkswagen came and licensed it from them, stuck their own, bumper and headlights and, little aesthetic things on it, and obviously slapped their brand on it, put their logo on it, put their mark on it. Guess one which sells for about $10,000 more than the other? The Volkswagen does, right? So it's a Chrysler sold as a Volkswagen, which intrinsically gives it a $10,000 bump in value. And that's the point, right? Brand itself can create perceived value, which actually can translate to actual value, right? The customer is still getting a great car, they're getting the minivan that they need, and they're getting the self-assurance that they're getting something from a brand they trust, right? Here's another example. This is not perceived value. This is different. So functionally, Uber and Lyft pretty much do the same thing, okay? We all agree? You open up the apps, they look pretty much the same. You get from point A to point B by sharing a ride with someone else. Someone else is gonna pick you up, drive you, get you where you need to go. And you do it all through an app, right? And even drivers probably find these as pretty similar experiences, pretty similar, functionality, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many drivers have those 2 stickers on their car. When I go and get a Lyft, right? Or if I get an Uber, 9 times out of 10, the driver actually drives for both, right? Because really there's no difference to him or her. They're just like, yep, I'm basically can do the exact same thing, whether it's for Uber or Lyft. So what's really the point of their brand, right? Why couldn't Lyft just look like Uber and Uber look like Lyft? Well, the reality is you have to make a choice as a customer or as a driver or someone providing a service to or getting a service from Uber or Lyft. You have to make a decision. And one of the ways in which human beings make a decision is to simply say, X is not A, all right? We differentiate. And that might be as simple as one is pink and one is black. And it's not a preference of like, oh, I like pink or I like black, but just that they're different, right? So when I'm searching in the App Store, I know that one is not the other, right? And if I have a preference, it makes my life easier. And that's the point. Brand can simply be differentiation. We are us and not them. That's it. All right, one more example here. So we've got Nike. We all recognize its brand, and we recognize probably most of these products. What is Nike really known for? Like what are they most known for? Yeah, that's right, shoes, right? Everyone knows them as a shoe company. And yet, what do they actually make? Well, just based on this photo here, we've got shorts, underwear, shirts, socks, basketballs, backpacks, all sorts of apparel and gear related around sports. There's so much more than a shoe company, right? And what does that mean for them and their customers? It means that they get product line extensions. It means that a customer can come in through one product and then spend a lifetime buying all sorts of things from Nike because they trust Nike, right? Are those shorts any different than another pair of shorts on the rack at Target? Are they functionally really any different than Under Armour? Probably not, right? They're probably nearly identical. In fact, they might even be back to our Volkswagen and Chrysler model. They might even be licensed, right? It might be their logo on someone else's pair of shorts. But it doesn't matter, right? Because the customer has bought into the brand and they have created, the brand has created loyalty to them, right? That is one of the other ways. These are just 3 ways, but there's a lot of different ways. There's one more way in which brand creates why it matters, right? Why it creates value. And I would argue that in a crowded marketplace, brand always wins. And I want to go back to this for a second. I want to think about in a crowded marketplace. Because I get this response sometimes when I have this slide up. I get someone who goes, well, I'm this brand new startup and we're doing something that no one else is doing and there's not even a single competitor out there. I go, okay, that might actually be true. You might have invented something that no one has invented, no one else has invented yet. You're getting to market with it. Good job. First to market, right? That's great. Do your customers understand that you're any different? Well, no, we have to do a lot of education and training and really show them that what we're doing is different. I'm like, yeah, that's right. Just because you have something different doesn't mean that everyone else understands that you're different. And then secondly, do they give you any attention? Well, you know, like they're busy and they have a lot of other things going on. And maybe you're in a B2B space and, you know, they're deciding what they're going to spend their money on this year. And, you know, it's us, or maybe it's a new email system, or maybe it's, they're going to spend more on training through their HR department. The reality is that every single marketplace is crowded. Even if you're creating the marketplace from scratch, first of all, no one understands that it's a marketplace, right? Customers don't walk around going, are you in the banana marketplace or are you in the veggie marketplace? I'm confused here. And until I understand how to categorize all this crap, I'm not buying anything. No, they don't do that. They naturally put you into categories that they or someone else has already taught them, right? And a lot of times those categories are pretty broad. So you're going to have to educate them into your new category and really make them understand that you are totally different, which means that you're crowded, right? That means that your category is crowded until you can do that. And then secondly, every single customer on this planet, whether you're selling business to consumer, you're selling a consumer product good, you're selling a service to another business, you're selling software to another business, doesn't matter who your customer is. The reality is their life and their brain is completely full, right? We have never had more information being thrown at us every single day, at every single moment. We've never had more advertising being thrown in our faces. And so whether it's your actual competitor or just some other company on the face of the earth, who's doing that advertising and putting that information out there, they have crowded your marketplace. And so when you come into marketing and you come into developing relationships with customers, you have to come with the perspective of, I have to carve out a space for our brand. It will not magically appear for you. You're going to have to do the hard work of really helping customers understand that you have something really compelling and important to say, and that they should pay attention. That doesn't come. That doesn't just get handed to you. All right, enough preaching on that stuff. So what gives you the best chance of influencing someone's perception of your brand? Really, that's what we're trying to get to, right? How do I do this? How do I create a really compelling brand? I would argue it ultimately comes down to using the truth. That means you have to find the truth, you have to define the truth, and you have to figure out how to convey the truth. There is an alternative. That is, you fake it, or you falsify it, or you force it, right? Those are the alternatives. You either tell the truth because you've found it, you've defined it, and you've figured out how to communicate it, or you just fake it, right? You make something up. And which, I mean, that's intrinsically lying, right? When we meet someone new and they tell us that they work at Target, right? We might believe them. And yet, if it's not the truth and we come to find that out, what would we call that? We would call it a lie. Well, what if that person said, well, I'm a college student. I hope one day to work at Target. I'm just faking it till I make it, right? We'd be like, BS. You're a load of crap, and someone somewhere in your life has told you that, and they should be slapped, right? We'd be like, that's an idiot move to make. We wouldn't probably, I hope not, we probably wouldn't falsify a resume, would we? And if we did and someone caught it, would they be at fault for firing you? No, we wouldn't say that, right? And yet, when we think about our brands and how we create our brands, we do that all the time. We say, oh, well, I'll just fake it till I make it, right? Or, we can fudge that. I know we're not really like that, but we can get there, right? That's because we haven't done the truly hard homework to figure out what is the real truth of our identity and base all of our execution on that, right? So how do you find the truth of your brand? I think that fundamentally it comes down to three questions. Why do you exist? What do you really value as an organization? And how should you package it up? How should it all feel, right? So three basic deliverables that you can work on are your purpose, or what I'd call a brand story, your core values, and your personality traits. And today, we're really going to focus on core values. Oh my goodness, we've got some duplicate slides here. Mike didn't QC his slides well enough. This is clear.
Shameless.
Yeah. All right, so brand values. Let's get to the heart of what we're talking about today. What are they? Brand values are the foundational pillars of your organization. They're the behaviors by which you're going to execute everything. And I would argue they're the things that your brand would fight for. Not how it looks or feels, but what are the behavioral traits that you're really going to fight for? What are those principles upon which you're going to stand? That's what we're talking about. So let's take a few examples and we can talk about this. All right, so honesty is honesty of value. Could you work in your organization with your team, sit down, really hash through it and go, do we really value honesty? I would argue you can, right? I think honesty can be a value. That might be one of your core values. What about profitability? This one comes up a lot when we work with teams, right? Oh, we value profitability. And I kind of go, well, hang on a sec. Is profitability the source of your principle, right? Is it a principle upon which you stand? Maybe. I mean, I guess you could say that. I think you might find yourself getting into some trouble at some point. But the reality is most organizations, profitability is not a value, it's an outcome or a metric or even a benefit, right? And that's why we want to be clear about the terms we're using. Values are not benefits. Values are not the end, they're the source, right? So we want to be really clear that we're looking for the source, right? We're looking for those principles upon which we're going to stand. That doesn't mean that we're not going to be profitable. It doesn't mean that we don't shoot for profitability, because that can be a great goal to shoot for, right? If it's the right goal. And at some points in your company, you might decide that Actually, profitability is not what we want to be chasing right now. We want to be chasing, I don't know, user acquisition, right? Pull an Amazon, go for users for 15 years, sacrifice all profitability for a decade and a half at the expense of your shareholders, which is just an amazing feat in and of itself, in hopes that maybe you're going to do something really incredible and big at the end of it. It seems so far that that's working out for Amazon. So another example, authenticity is a value. That can be a source of decision-making. Are we being authentic in making this decision right now? Whatever that decision is, and running it through that filter, right? And can we say that all the time about everything that we do? Yeah, I would argue authenticity could be one of your core values. Again, is success a value? I would argue it's not, right? Success, again, is a benefit or a goal. And hopefully you get a little bit more defined than just success. If you're going around your company telling people that we're shooting for success, I think you're probably going to get a lot of people scratching their heads going, what the crap do you mean by success, right? What does that look like? Answer that question and you'll be fine. All right, so how do you know what your values are? Well, here's one way to test them. Would all of your stakeholders care about the value that you're coming up with or that you're discussing, right? So question that. Would ownership care if that's one of your core values? Would customers care? Would they be like, hey, cool, I like that, that's cool? Would employees, right? Would all of your vendors and partners agree? Would they say, yeah, I want you to have that core value, that'd be great, right? And if one of these groups says, you know what, you don't act like it with me, and I don't really care, then it's probably not a core value, right? If it's segmented to only one or two of these groups, it's probably not one of your core values. It's probably a goal, or maybe a metric, or maybe even just purely a tactic in a short-term environment that you need to use in order to get what you need, right? But if it's not really driving your business at the deepest, most core level, one of the ways you know that is because it's not being reflected with these different relationships. All right, so another test of whether or not this is one of your core values is, will it stand the test of time, right? Is this something that we are going to put a stake in the ground on, and we're going to hold to that for years, maybe even decades, depending on how long our organization is going to be around? How long are we willing to hold this? 6 months. That's not a core value. That is definitely not a core value. I don't know what that is. It's something else. Maybe it's something a little, it's a campaign, and it's something that, that's a nice little trend that's going on in the marketplace, and we want to kind of ride that wave a little bit. But that's not here to stay, right? It's got to be here to stay. It's got to be something that you're really going to put your stake in the ground, and you're going to keep hammering it over and over and over for a long time to come. All right. I would argue that values that change are thereby negotiable, right? You can't build on transience. What I mean by that is, if your values are constantly changing, you're screwing with the foundation of your house, right? And eventually, if you screw with it enough, that whole thing is going to fall down. So if you're building your brand on really, truly core values, you're setting a really firm, solid, long-term foundation for your brand. This is the way in which we're going to operate. We're going to make decisions according to these principles. And I would argue, keep them simple, you know, come up with like maybe 3 to 5. If you're coming up with more than 5, I think you're probably stretching the capacity of your team and your customers and your other stakeholders to really keep those at the forefront of everything they do, right? I think it's really important that you keep them simple and keep the number down. So let's give some examples here. This is always helpful to kind of see what do core values actually look like. So these are Google's core values. At least a couple years ago when I pulled these, they may have changed them a little bit, but this is what they've got out there. Focus on the user and all else will follow. I'm not going to read all of them, but I'll pull out a few. Fast is better than slow. Democracy on the web works. There's always more information out there. You can be serious without a suit. Great just isn't good enough, right? You'll notice some things. One is these are slightly assumptive, right? They assume things about how the world works. They're pretty close to actually belief statements saying, you know what? Regardless of what someone else might say or another company, we believe that fast is better than slow. And that when push comes to shove, it is better that whatever we're going to do, we better be fast, right? It is better for us to be fast in something than to be slow in something. That means they're going to be making choices according to these. Or things like the need for information crosses all borders. That immediately makes them a global company, right? That says we do not create borders within our organization. Now, of course, it's going to raise questions, right? So a decision comes up. Hey, we really want to do business in China, but the Chinese government wants us to censor our content. Do our core values allow us to do that? And what's great is they now have a set of core values against which they can then evaluate their decision in that context and go, what would be the right move? Not necessarily the right business move from a success or profitability or metric standpoint, but what would be true to who we are as an organization and the way in which we make decisions. Then, of course, it's up to them to decide if they've done that the right way or not, right? So is censoring content according to their values? I don't know. I don't work at Google, and I think that's a pretty complicated thing to answer. But if I was on their team, if I was in their leadership, I'd be coming back to these values saying the decision isn't necessarily first and foremost a business decision. It's a core values decision, right? Are these things that we say we believe being held high when we make that decision? All right, here's another example. This is even simpler, which I love. Google's got what, like 10-ish? I'm not going to count them all. They got about 10. All right, Southwest got it down to 6. And really, they summarize it with 2. Live the Southwest way and work the Southwest way. Well, how do you live the Southwest way? With a warrior spirit, a servant's heart, and a fun-loving attitude. All right, and how do you work the Southwest way? Safety and reliability. We have friendly customer service at a low cost. Wow, like that makes it really simple to understand on day one when you walk in as a new Southwest employee, how should you do your job? With a warrior spirit, servant's heart, fun-loving attitude, while we hold safety and reliability high, we have great friendly customer service at a low cost. Wow, that creates this great framework through which they can make so many decisions that much easier. And that's the real value of values, is that it creates this framework through which you can make decisions and not be caught off guard and going, I'm not sure which way we should go on this. Well, pull out your values, right? Now all of a sudden you have a framework through which to make that decision. And something that isn't necessarily just purely financially driven. That can be a part of your decision-making process, for sure. But if you only make decisions based on financial outcomes, well, first you have to decide, are you making it on a short-term basis or a long-term basis, right? Just in my personal life, right? If I was to invest in a stock, I would have to make a decision upfront about how I was investing. Am I investing for a day, a week, a month, a year, 10 years? And that decision in and of itself would impact what stock I would put money into. And that's what you have to do when you come to financial decisions. You have to have something greater to put your framework through than just, oh, well, whatever's financially sound. To what end, right? For how long? And what values are you willing to sacrifice along the way? Okay, so there's your core values. There's some examples for you. So how do you get to know yours? Well, you got to ask some really tough questions. I think that's where this really all starts. Gather your leadership team, put some heads together, maybe even survey some people. If you have a large organization, survey lots of people in your organization, all of them, right? Do some interviews. But these are the questions you need to be asking. What really drives us? What keeps us going day in and day out, right? What are we not willing to sacrifice ever? What lines have we drawn in the sand that we're unwilling to cross? What do we get really bent out of shape about? What just gets us totally irked, right? Some organizations they cannot handle when stuff isn't done just a certain way, right? That I think is a sign of a value. Somewhere underneath that little pet peeve is a value. Something that we do it this way. And there's a reason why we do it this way. It's because we value something. And when we don't see that happening, that value gets kind of tweaked and irked. Some other questions: what do you really care or really not care about? Sometimes it's better to ask the negative than the positive. It's just you'll be surprised what comes out when you ask the positive. What do we really not care about? Well, we just really don't care about the environment. All right, well, there you go. Now you know one of your values. In what situations are we willing to leave money on the table? Oh man, that is a huge one. That's a really, really good one to kind of evaluate. What are those principles on which you're gonna stand and you're not gonna sacrifice on them, even when there's money on the table to be had. And then where do we find ourselves over investing? I think this is a really important question to be asking around your core values. Where do you find yourselves kind of like, you know, we always kind of put a little more into that. We don't have to, but we do. I think there's an answer underneath that. I think there's a core value somewhere in there that's really driving you to say, you know, we really care about something. We care about it so much, we're willing to put more into it. All right, so those are some questions to kind of get you started. Also, of course, we've got a worksheet. We have worksheets for everything, don't we, Chris? So we've got a values worksheet. Go download that. Check out the URL there. Or you can go on our website, go on the resources page, you'll find them there. And so it's got some processes that'll help you kind of work through with your team, what are your values. You can start to kind of answer some of these questions here through that worksheet, and you can start to really get your team kind of rallying around some ideas of what your values are. So the key though is you got to get beyond just a word, right? So a lot of the work you're going to be doing up front in answering these is really going to be like, oh, we're going to come up with a word, right? Like maybe we really value customer service, right? Let's just say that's what it is. I won't get into why I think that's a terrible core value, but let's just say that's what it is. Customer service. Well, what kind? To what level? In what way, right? What does that look like? That's why getting beyond just a word or a couple words is really, really critical to having really great core values. So what you want to do is create value statements. So not just a word, but a statement that then explains what does that look like when it's put into action? What are the behaviors that we expect when we say we value that thing? So these are often complete thoughts. Again, throw up that example from Google. I think these are really good examples. They don't even use a single word to summarize these. They just say, nope, these are our principles. These are the values by which we're gonna deliver to the world what we do. So things like, you don't need to be at your desk to need an answer. Wow, that actually gives me a bit of a picture as to what they value, right? That means that I can be working anywhere, right? I'm not tied to one space at one time. Hang on, we got a question here in the chat maybe? Nope. All right. How do I go back? Why is it not letting me go back? Okay, well, we're gonna keep going here. So here's some examples that kind of help you on your way. So let's say you came up with authenticity. You answered a bunch of those questions that we talked about a few slides ago, maybe downloaded our worksheet, and you came up with authenticity as one of your core values. Well, now you need to write a statement that explains that. So you might write something that says, we wear who we are on our sleeves. Oh, wow, like that actually gives me a lot more depth into what you mean by authenticity. So if I'm a new employee or I'm a customer who happens to see this in action, wow, now I really understand what that means and what that should look like. Another example might be quality, right? We say, oh, quality is one of our core values. What we really mean is that good enough doesn't cut it, right? That we're striving for excellence. There's a lot of different ways you could probably say that, right? So even it doesn't have to be just a single sentence. You can come up with a little paragraph that explains it. Get as deep as you want. Another example might be teamwork. You'll never fly solo. What does that mean? That means that if I'm working on something and I'm finding myself stuck and I'm all by myself, I need to go ask for help, right? I need to be a part of the team. I need to be helping engage my other coworkers in what I'm doing, and vice versa, right? When someone's needing help, we don't allow them to just sit in the corner and work by themselves and get frustrated. We help them, right? We don't fly solo. Maybe that even means that this company who has this core value says, you know what? Every single employee in our company is going to be a part of a core team, a small group of people that they can rely on and work with day in and day out, right? You could start creating processes around these things. You can start creating structure and frameworks through which your company operates. All right, so one key point here, the value statements, they have to be true, right? You can't just make crap up because it sounds good. It has to actually be true about your organization. Remember, go back, right? How do you influence someone's perception of your brand? How do you influence customers and potential employees and really anyone that you're creating relationships with? How do you influence their perception of your brand? You stake it on the truth, right? So if you're creating statements that just because like, oh, that sounds really good, I like how that sounds, think it through, right? Is that really something, is that really a hill that you're willing to die on? Is that something you're going to create structure and processes around? Is that something that you're actually going to practice day in and day out? Or is that just because, well, it just sounds good, right? Don't make stuff up. All right, a good qualifier for that. How do you know if it's true? Well, a client or a customer always see us do this. Yeah, if they won't, if they're not always going to see you do it, it might not be true. So back to the drawing board. All right, again, here's that worksheet, if that's going to be helpful for you, rsnd.co/values-worksheet. All right, and of course, you got to do a little gut check, right? You can't just do the worksheet. You can't just make a bunch of assumptions with your team. You've got to actually gut check those assumptions. So the first is ask each other, right? Are the answers that we're coming up with about our core values, are these right? Right? Am I assuming something, and do you see something wrong with the way I'm approaching this? Ask like the rest of your company. Put that out there. Survey them. Interview them, right? And then ask your customers, does this feel right? Do you see us doing this? Share those statements around, right? Ask for evidence. Let's document how we actually behave and live this out, even right now. And then you have to articulate it, right? You have to make it clear and keep gut checking, right? So these become the seeds of your brand values. And then there's questions around, well, what do I do with these great core values that we've created, right? Well, I think first and foremost, you got to turn them into action, right? The old adage always seems true. Actions always speak louder than words. And I think especially when we're talking about the relationships in business with customers, with employees, with your vendors, your partners, your shareholders and ownership, your actions as an organization will always speak louder than your words. So how do you put your values into action? Well, that means you probably need to create a values-driven culture, one that steeps your work in your values, right? And when you think about steeping a tea bag in hot water, right? You keep putting it back in and back in and back in and back in order to really infuse that flavor throughout all of that hot water. And that's what you have to do. You have to keep putting your values back in front of people. You have to keep like using them. You have to keep behaving according to them. So here's some simple ways to start doing that. One, you got to publish them. Nobody can really infuse them into their work if they don't know them, right? They have to actually know those values. There's some simple stuff you can do. Yes, you can definitely put posters on the wall. I hope you don't stop at posters, but if you got to start somewhere, put a freaking poster on the wall. I'm cool with that, right? Maybe write some blog posts. I was actually really cool company I got introduced to called Faith Life, and they create software for churches. And I was checking out their CEO's blog, his personal blog. And I realized as I'm reading through these posts, I'm like, oh, he's like unpacking all of their core values, one value at a time in his blog posts. And I'm like, that's brilliant. That's such a great idea. I'm like, I'm gonna have to steal that somehow. So, I mean, that's an easy one, right? It's like publish some blog posts about each one of your core values and really like unpack it. How'd you come up with it? What does it mean? How do you see it being lived out? How do you see more ways of living it out? How can you inspire people in your organization to keep trying more to live out that value? And then you can do fun stuff, put some desktop backgrounds together, make a set of postcards. We did that with some of our values, and we share those with everybody, both inside our organization, outside our organization. People love them. Create slide decks so you can present with them, and put your core values into almost any presentation you give, right? infuse them into everything you do. And hey, if you want to, you feel inspired, write a book about them, right? Maybe a little manifesto, right? It doesn't have to be a really formal thing. It doesn't have to be hardbound, you know, published by some crazy publishing company and on the Amazon bestseller list. That's not what you're doing here. You're just simply trying to get your values out into the world. What better way than to actually publish maybe a little ebook, right? And share that around the office, share that with employees, share that with key customers and clients, saying, hey, just so you know, when you enter into a relationship with us, this is how we're going to make decisions. And I think you're going to find a lot of value in that, right? Because our values are really for your benefit. All right, there's some other stuff you can do. Oh, let's get crazy, right? Actually hire and fire according to your values. Oh, now we're getting real, right? Review resumes and cover letters according to your values. Run your interviews through your values, or even like talk to your potential new hire about, hey, what do you think about this value? How would you live this out? Give them maybe some situational stuff, and then evaluate how did they make a decision according to your values. You can do pre-hire assessments around your values, and then of course first day training, right? Make sure the values are front and center in that first day of training, and well, hopefully throughout their training, but definitely first day. And then assess with your values. Keep checking in, right? How are we doing, both individually and corporately, right? You can do annual reviews, quarterly check-ins, surveys, interviews across your company, with your customers. Do it personally, individually, with different staff. Do it corporately as a whole organization. And then celebrate your values, right? Put them out there for people to see. Award people according to how they behave in your company. Highlight customers according to your values. Partner and vendor recognition. There's just so many ways in which you can celebrate those values and the way that people are living them out. And then get back to branding. Personify your values, right? Create a brand personality founded on your values. I think this might actually be one of the harder pieces of this process, because it's a little tricky to abstract out of your values how that should feel. But that's really what we're trying to do here is how can we connect the brand back to how you do business, and make sure your marketing communications are also running the values through, right? When they're making decisions about how we're going to write something, or how we're going to produce this video, or how we're going to design this web page, are we infusing our values into these decisions? Make your customers feel your values without hitting them over the head with them. And what I mean by that is, if you have to constantly tell your customers what your values are, and they go, okay, you just told me and I forgot. What are they again? That means they're not feeling them. What they should be doing is they get introduced to your values. They go, hey, here's our values. Maybe you put that manifesto in front of them, and they go, oh yeah, this makes total sense. You guys totally operate like this, right? That's because you've been living them out, right? So show your customers, make them feel your values without having to always tell them what your values are. All right, so we're just about done here. Wrap up a couple items. Here's some other stuff you can be thinking about as you're building your brand beyond just values. Your brand story, audience segments and personas of your customers, doing some market research, understanding where in the market you sit, who is your competition, what do customers think about the different products and services being offered to them within kind of your market. What's your brand personality? How do you get those values to extend into the personality of your brand? Tagline, name, logo, visual guidelines, verbal guidelines, all sorts of fun stuff you can start using to build your brand. If you want help, I highly recommend our free brand tool. Go to rsnd.co/brand-tool. You can take a quick assessment to understand where you're at with your brand. What are some gaps in your branding process? It might give you some ideas of kind of what your next steps are if you're trying to figure out what you should be working on or what you should not be working on. All right, and then of course, you can always ask us for help. We run team branding workshops, one-on-one consulting with me or Chris or one of our other brand strategists. And then of course, we do full service branding and rebrands for organizations that are ready to kind of take it on and do it soup to nuts. So give us a shout at that email address or hit us up on our website, whatever's easier for you. We'd love to help you out if that's something you need help with. So thanks, everybody. Got any questions? Do we have anybody still on? I hope so.
I have a question.
Yeah, Chris. I love your questions.
I put it in the chat.
I will attempt to see it.
You said honesty might be a value. Isn't that a little too obvious?
Yeah,
Or maybe not, or maybe sometimes not.
Yeah. I mean, our examples today were a little cliche, right? Let's be honest about honesty.
I used to tell students, like, environmentalism, like, okay, you don't care about the environment, everybody cares about the environment. You don't need to say it, right? But maybe some cases you may need to say it.
You may need to. Yeah, and that's why I think asking those questions, like, what do we really care about? What do we not care about, right? So if you're buckling down and you're working really hard on answering that question and you say, oh, you know what? We actually just don't really care about the environment, right? Then,
like you were saying.
Okay, then that shouldn't, like, don't make the environment your core value if it's not, right? So that's, I think, the first, I mean, that was a pretty extreme example. I'm not sure anyone's going to say.
Like a used car, they might say, like, well, honestly, because we're in an industry where not everybody does that. So it might be actually relevant.
Yeah. So again, you have to ask, is it true, right? Just because we have customers who want us to be honest, or it would be a competitive advantage to be honest, are we willing to make that true, right? And how far are we willing to go to make sure that honesty really is a core value? And then I think, you know, within the specific context of your organization and the type of work you do, think of some examples where you might be tempted to stray, right? So as a used car dealer, are you willing to fire? What level of your number one salesman for telling a client or a customer that this car gets 80 miles per gallon when it only gets 60, right? You say honesty is a core value. How many strikes does it take, right? Or what kind of honesty are we talking about? I think though that's probably, you know, the bigger question of, like, tell me more, right? So when you kind of come up with that first word, right? Oh, honesty, you know, I think we really believe in honesty. Okay, tell me more, right? Show me some examples. What does that look like? How does that get lived out? What you might find is that there's actually a more specific or more appropriate kind of word or way to describe honesty that makes it more indicative of your particular culture. Honesty is a big word. I mean, I said earlier, customer service, right? And I kind of alluded to the fact that I don't like customer service as a core value. And part of the reason I don't like it is because it's not specific, right? Customer service is just, what kind of customer service?
Right.
To all customers, only specific customers? When are we not willing to give customer service? Right?
Well, and how does that manifest, right?
Yeah.
Is it manifested in our speed of fulfillment?
Yeah.
Is it manifested in our return policy?
Yeah.
Specifically?
Yeah. So I also don't love core values that only speak to one stakeholder group, right? So when we say customer service and we say we value customer service above all else, right? Then we're really kind of saying we don't care about our employees, we just care about customers. Right.
The shareholders.
Yeah. So really there's something deeper that I think you're trying to say when you say you value customer service, that's more universal.
Right. Okay, so you value, maybe it's just generosity.
We value service. We value serving one another, serving people, maybe. I don't know. So yeah, I think getting beyond kind of those stakeholder only core values, right, will help you to get to a deeper level of core value. What's really driving your business? Cool. I didn't see any other questions, so.
Hit the road.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. See you next time. Cool.